Welcome to Spiritual Truths with your host, Kerry-Marie. I'm delighted to have with me Karen Frances McCarthy from New York. She's a spiritual medium, an author, and a teacher. And today she's going to be discussing new approaches to spirituality. I'd like to say thank you so much for taking the time out of your day or evening to watch or listen to this podcast. If you enjoy it, please can you like and also subscribe to our Spiritual Truths channel. Blessings and love, Kerry-Marie. Hi Karen, good to see you again.
Hi, Kerry-Marie, you too?
It's been a while since I connected with you. I think it was last year.
Yeah, I think it
And
was longer. Was it two years ago, maybe?
last year we did the podcast because I only started
Oh, we
about,
did. It was
yeah,
last year. Oh, okay.
time. Yeah.
Marvelous.
And we did a podcast with you, which I love listening to because I was on a river cruise. And I
Mm,
was around a lot of people that were not into spiritual things, and it gave me some feeling of belonging, like listening to a lovely podcast. And the podcast you did back then was Death Don't Us Part, which you
yeah.
written about your partner and how he started communicating to you
Mm,
unexpectedly because you weren't really into all this sort of thing, and you had and it's sort of what's happening, and you developed, and it was a very interesting podcast. So we've come back and you've got other things to talk about. So you've been awarded a PhD. Congratulations.
yeah.
Britain's one of the top research world ranked universities in Birmingham. So
Mm.
congratulations, well
Yeah,
done.
Birmingham in the UK. Yeah,
Birmingham,
in
the
Britain.
UK. So, oh, is there Birmingham somewhere else, is there?
Alabama.
Oh, really? Didn't know that. Okay, Birmingham, UK. So that would take a lot of work. And you did mention, I looked at your email and you said there's a lot of research about what was
Mm.
involved. So I'd love you to share with us about what it was all about.
Yeah, so what I do, my as a writer, as you know, my interest and my master's degree is in literature. So I decided to do my PhD in literature. So I decided to look at ghost stories, ghost literature. And so the thing about a PhD, you spend the first year, you're just sort of reading everything. For anybody thinking about doing a PhD, it's okay not to have a clue what you're talking about in the first year. The first year is just really reading everything I could get my hands on in terms of, I really wanted to do something contemporary. So in terms of contemporary ghost literature. And I started noticing then this interesting pattern emerging in contemporary American ghost literature. Now, when I say ghost literature, that just happens to be the literary genre for spirits, specters, whatever you want to call it. That's why I'm using that term. But I started noticing that there's a lot of very, very experimental work going on in literature, in modern fiction, but in American literature in particular, I found was this interesting sort of shift. So instead of, as you know, ghost stories have always been ghosts haunting the living, they're always scary things, they're always like that thing lurking in the dark. There's always something nefarious going on when there's ghosts around. That's the nature of traditional ghost literature. What I found is happening in 21st century literature, so literature in the last 20, 25 years, particularly in America, is the ghosts no longer haunt. In fact, the ghosts are no longer, when I say ghosts, just to clarify again, I mean spirits of the dearly departed,
Yeah.
um, you know, but I'm just using that term because that's the term that's used in the genre in literature. They have relocated the ghosts of the spirits out of the physical world entirely and moved them into sort of a multi-dimensional afterlife space
Right.
where now they are working out their own traumas. It's all done now in these really interesting sort of afterlife or liminal environments. So that allows for an awful lot of imagination, obviously, because they're creating these worlds. But it was a really interesting shift I noticed because they were tackling really serious subjects like trauma and eco destruction and
Right.
and on and all of these things in really highly respected literature like Man Booker Prize winners, New York Times bestsellers. And it was just an interesting shift for me why has the ghost stopped haunting the living? The living don't even factor into these stories. They just moved them off and they explore and they continue their journey. And it's not just that nobody's arriving in heaven. There is no gods. There is no theology. There's no none of this. They're arriving in these new worlds where they have to come to terms with things, where they have to live out things. And the implication in all of them is that this is multidimensional. So they live out a certain amount of experiences and growth in the first, or so like Alice Sebald calls the first one a small heaven, and her character, progresses towards wide heaven. With Mitch Albom, they arrive in first heaven, then second heaven. So it continues on. So this is ideas, of course, that Swedenborg in the late 1700s talked about three tiers to the afterlife, and we know within the spiritualist tradition that Andrew Jackson Davis talked about seven different dimensions. We know that Jesus talked about the many mansions, so all of these ideas of this continued progression in the afterlife. So I thought that was very interesting because this is not religious literature. This is fiction. And it was just like this interesting convergence of ideas from completely disparate writers writing different formats. Some are very experimental, some are very like fable-like. And they've kind of come together completely independently and starting to look in these spaces and exploring the growth and the healing and the trauma and the vengeance. I mean, vengeance is gone. There's, it's just a really fascinating turn of events that's happening. So I was really interested in this because this has never been the ghost story. The ghosts always were creepy things that haunted, and now they are fully fledged characters in these stories. So they're the narrators. It's their story, which it never was. I mean, look at Wuthering Heights. You look at any of these. It's always, the stories are always about the living. They're never about the ghosts. The ghosts are sort of the protagonists or the plot devices, but the heroes are always the living. Well, in this literature now, the focus is completely on the continued growth of the discarnate spirit, And so I thought, well, that's really interesting now all of a sudden, and it's coming in different forms and from different angles. And there's some very experimental things going on in literature, in ghost literature in a lot of different countries. But in the States, I found that this was a really interesting turn of events. Yeah. And so my question then was, why? Why is this happening? Why has there been this shift in how people who are not particularly religious, who aren't spiritualists, who are certainly not mediums, who aren't talking about near-death experiences, none of this sort of stuff, what's influencing them to arrive in these places? So that was my question, like, what on earth? And so that's what I set about sort of researching.
Interesting. Yeah. So did this change your thoughts as well about how you thought about things?
Well, I think it didn't really change my thoughts. What it did was, which was interesting, was when people work on ghost literature, they're not coming from my vantage point, right? So as a medium, you and I, we already know this is the truth. Yes. But usually when people are researching ghost literature, they're researching it from the ordinary lay perspective that the ghost is a ghost, whereas I'm looking at it going, well, the ghost is real. So there was never any issue of asking the question, is it real? Is it not real? That became moot, right?
Right.
Real. Now, because I always feel like if we can just sort of get to the point where like the ghost is real, so let's stop debating whether the ghost is real or not. If we can get to the point where let's just accept the ghost is real, now we can start having interesting conversations. It's not just that, is it real or is it not? Is it your imagination or is it not? I mean, that's goes nowhere. So I thought, moving on from that, just accepting that the ghost is real, starts to now we can start exploring some interesting questions. So from my vantage point as being the researcher, I was starting from the place where the ghost is real.
Yes.
So I think it wasn't so much that the literature changed my perspective at all. These were all concepts that I'd already, so it was just very interesting for me because I was coming from that point. And so for me, we were now getting into some really interesting ideas
Mm.
beyond that, is the ghost real. So I think most people, when they're studying or when they're researching ghost literature, a lot of it gets caught on that question,
Question.
which to me I just bypassed. So I think that's why it became interesting.
Well, the other thing that made me, as a medium, and because I believe that the spirit or the ghost is real.
Mm.
The first thing that came to me, you were talking, I found like sparked my interest was when you were talking about the different worlds, the different heavens, things like that. So that's something really interesting to explore. Did you explore that, the literature about that?
Like, yeah, I mean, I explored it in the context of how these novelists were presenting it and the different really interesting and experimental ways and the imagination that was in the novels. When I think where it got very interesting for me, and I think where it was very unexpected for other people reading it, was when I started sort of setting the scene,
Mm.
of answering the question of why is now fiction why has sort of spectral or ghost literature taken this turn where we're starting to explore these really interesting metaphysical questions. We've moved beyond the heaven or hell and the judgment or reward, and all of that's
Mm.
gone.
Yeah.
Now let's explore something interesting. And so that was very interesting for me. But when I was sort of exploring the why is this happening, that was also very interesting because that's where I started looking at
Mm.
uh, what's causing this new way. So, like George Saunders, for instance, who wrote Lincoln and the Bardos, a book prize winner, he's one of my novelists. So he is a Buddhist practitioner, but with a Christian background, and so he sort of melds both of the best of both together, really, in his life. And so I started looking at you know these new approaches that are outside religious dogma,
Yeah.
are outside the superstition of the ghost story. They're really into new territory. And what is this new territory? So that was what was interesting to me,
Yeah.
and what's influencing these new ideas and these new approaches to spirituality. And that was so being able to just get rid of heaven and
Yes.
hell and purgatory and all of this nonsense. Sorry to all the people believing I didn't mean nonsense, but just to get rid of all of those very confining beliefs and to sort of get open up into sort of looking at the afterlife as this vast
Mm.
space
Mm.
where we continue to grow, where we continue to heal, where we continue to evolve, where we continue to advance becomes really it's a much more interesting discussion.
It was a
And so
discovery. It's a discovery, isn't it?
yeah, really is. And I know that Andrew Jackson Davis was talking about this back in the late 1800s, and Swedenborg was talking about this in the 1700s. But we're in a very secular age now.
Mm.
And these novelists, secular novelists, really are starting to explore these ideas. And I think a lot of this, well, this is my argument, has to do with I think we have arrived at a place. Now, I know I'm not saying religion has failed or secularism has failed, but there has been this move where they thought, oh, the material age or the secular age will put an end to religion, and that'll be that. But what we're actually finding, when I found in the research, is that there is actually quite a large swell back to curated spirituality, if I can call that. So things like the spiritual but not religious, people who are spiritual but don't subscribe to a religion,
Yes.
um, curated religions like Saunders' religion or indeed ours, most likely, where I'm a practicing Buddhist, but I'm also a spiritualist medium and I was raised Catholic, and you can start to really find your own voice, your own kind of spirituality that works for you. But I think significantly has been, and I kind of came across studies done by Pew and quite a lot of different research institutions who have found that in our very contemporary modern world, that the secular paradigm, this idea that we don't need a God, that God is a myth or whatever, that has not improved people's lives. That people are seeking a sense of connection or a sense of purpose or a sense of meaning that we used to get from organized religion. So you strip away the organized religion, and what was left wasn't enough. And so
Yeah.
now it's like there is a movement back towards belonging and a need to feel that you're belonging to something greater than the self.
Yes, that's really important. That's
Mm.
so important.
Yeah. And so I think that really starts to color our contemporary sort of spirituality, where we have to, I mean, and Viktor Frankl was writing about this during the Second World War. I mean, Viktor Frankl was the Auschwitz prisoner, and he said that the people who survive are the people who find a reason to live and are people who find a way to help other people. And I think that and I've talked about this at different conferences and whatnot, that we need to make sure that we're not confusing self-help with spirituality. Self-help is a part of spirituality, but spirituality is greater than self-help, because
Yes, it is. Yeah.
spirituality is a
Mm.
belonging to something greater, but it's also a contributing to
Yes.
the well-being of others or to the well-being of a cause or to something else. Always there's something more than the self
I just
within it.
listened to a podcast. I don't know if you've heard him with Charmaine the God. He's a African American. He
Mm,
was yeah, I listened with Mel Robbins' podcast. Quite interesting. He talked about that, the feeling of
mm,
connection and the of being of service and giving back.
yeah,
God
yeah,
within. He talks about the God within a lot because that's what he talked about and how he changed and evolved.
yeah,
Yeah. And the other thing
absolutely.
that spoke to me as well, because when I'm a celebrant, independent, we just celebrate in New Zealand and you've got to belong to a community. And
Mm.
so my community was the spiritual community that's non-religious.
Yes.
It's quite a big
And there
community.
are,
It's a big
yeah,
community.
there are a few different movements now. There's the very big spiritual but not religious category. There's the new religious movements that kind of cover a lot of these more syncretic or curated um, spiritualities, where people are finding what has meaning for them, as opposed
Mm,
to being told by some outside authority what should have meaning for them.
yeah.
There's another, the NONES, as opposed to the nuns, not nuns as in NUNS, but so there's quite a lot of interesting um, new movements evolving. And it's coming, I think, out of the failure of secularism to really speak to a very, very deep human need that we have to
Mm,
be part of something greater than ourselves.
absolutely. But also, I think probably like organized religion suited those times.
Absolutely,
That
yeah.
time there was a structure, that's how you lived. That's
Yeah,
it suited people back then, but now as times evolved, so
yeah,
has spirituality. So
yeah.
if I was a person, I'm thinking about the listener here, and I feel quite lost, and I want to become unsure, but I want to come with something bigger than myself. I want to feel connected. What would you suggest that they did?
Well, I think that that's a very, very personal thing. So I would say explore, because
Mm.
I think that there's, and I don't want to downplay that religion is massively significant to billions of people. So I'm not trying to say that religion is gone, because it really isn't. But if an organized religion is not speaking to an individual, like I was raised a Catholic, it
Mm.
didn't got to a point when I was about 17 where this is just not doing it. I practice Buddhism now, but then
Right.
there are also aspects of Buddhism that um, I don't quite get on, but I get an awful lot out of that practice.
Mm.
But it's not consistent with mediumship, for example. So, I
Mm.
can't be jump in or 2 feet fully into any one thing. There's like lots, I would say, to go and explore different things, but I'd say that I think that really, meditation is a great way to do this, because it's not just the meditation that just helps us manage this mad world we're in by bringing us into a calmer place. It also
Mm.
can be a period where it allows for the quietness, for reflection, where the intuition can speak and the intuition can guide. So for me, I kind of explored, and I recommend this to anybody to go
Mm.
explore things. It doesn't have to be Buddhism, it can be lots of things. Go on a little voyage of exploration, see what works for you. I mean, one of the most powerful things I've done is I went to a Quaker meeting, and the
Mm.
Quakers just sit in silence and wait to be moved by the spirit. Now, that's a religion.
Mm.
They're not up there pounding the pulpit or anything. You're just waiting to be moved by the spirit, which, as you and I know, is kind of a key part of spiritualism, especially when it comes
Mm.
to spirit speaking or inspirational addresses or anything like that. We are really moving into a place of quiet to allow ourselves speak from the spirit. So I know this is sort of a roundabout way I think of answering, but I think it's a very personal. The thing about modern spirituality or these new forms of spirituality is that they are curated, they are personally put together. We've got to move and explore and find what resonates with us. And
I
it doesn't
agree.
have to be one thing. It can
Yeah,
be,
a
you
few
know, yeah, it
things.
can.
Yeah, it's quite interesting because I was brought up Catholic as well. And we're spiritualists. But people say, so to what religion? I say, I'm Kerry-Marie's religion. That's what I say. I'm Kerry-Marie's
Yeah,
religion because
yeah.
I just found my own way, my own sense and what's right for me. Because I
Mm,
found every organized sort of religion, like you say, Buddhism or anything, has something in it that doesn't quite sit right for me. So it's almost that
mm,
you need to take out of different communities or religions or followings or whatever,
mm,
what sits right for you. And I think
mm.
also that spirit's a really good teacher.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely,
Spiritual.
yeah. And I
One,
think
yeah, sorry, yeah.
the Dalai Lama has said, I think he's like, my religion is compassion, I think it was what he said.
Oh,
And I mean, really, everything should be compassion. It should all start with compassion,
mm,
compassion for the self, compassion for others. And if that's all your religion and all your spirituality is just this sense of compassion for yourself and yourself to compassion for others,
yeah.
I mean, that in itself is a beautiful thing.
Yeah, well, I listened to a podcast the other day. A friend sent it to me. She's a homeopath, and she sent me. It was a lady who's into homeopathy and the chakras and everything, and she sent it to me. And I wasn't sure, and I listened to it, but there was something in there, and I thought this is what Spirit's shown me. And
Yeah.
what she said was, and I found it very moving, is that there was one time I did a retreat, and I did a retreat about going to your soul, and I
Mm,
got very emotional because my soul just said one thing to me, kind. And I'd realized that from a baby right to how old I am now, that soul had never changed.
mm,
And it made me feel emotional because it's hard to be kind in this world. But also maybe kind, maybe emotional, it hadn't changed. And the one thing she said in this podcast is your soul never changes. And I'm
mm,
thinking that she's obviously been given information from a source from somewhere because
mm,
this lady lives in America. I've never met her. I'm not a homeopath. I just thought it was interesting we both came to the same
mm,
conclusion. Yeah.
mm, mm.
And it's
Yeah.
just solely on what I've been given,
Mm,
not what someone's taught me.
yeah.
I think
Yeah.
going, say that, and interesting enough, I'm going to be doing a podcast about meditation after this. So I also feel like what you're saying, going with what resonates with you, what works for you. Everybody's individual, everybody's different, but it will resonate with you, won't it?
Yeah.
And there's nothing
That's the
wrong.
thing. I mean,
Yeah, resonate with
resonance is the voice of the spirit, right? I mean, the resonance
you.
is your intuition, which is the voice of the spirit.
So that's good. So what about and it unfolds? I'm hearing the word it unfolds. So what about people like are searching, they're dealing with grief? Like they had no, I don't know, I don't know, they could be lost, they're dealing with grief. They could be religious, they could be non-religious, they could be spiritual, non-spiritual. How do you feel that this new way of thinking can help them with grief, processing grief?
Well, one huge thing, obviously, is if you're like, if you believe in that the soul and that the spirit, I don't use the word soul very often, but that the spirit continues,
Mm,
um, and that it is in these very tangible ways that we're finding in contemporary literature, that we're finding just within our own spiritualist tradition, the spirit continues um, to in new spaces, and new realms, and new, new sort of worlds. And with that, it continues and continues and continues. There's loads of evidence for this, as we know. But I think when we understand that this is simply a perception. This what we've got here is just our perception at the moment. We can't really understand beyond this, because we can't understand beyond our own frame of reference. But if we can suspend that and just know that there is a continuity of the spirit, that there is, and we know from mediumship that people meet people, that we know that people don't just die and sprout wings. We know that people continue, and they continue to grow, and they continue to heal, and they continue to be involved. I love the approach of, contemporary approaches to consciousness theories that sort of peels away all the illusion and just shows this sort of continuity. I think if we can start to see things in those very contemporary ways, where we understand there's like a superconscious that we are all part of even now. So we are in the superconscious, we're in it, you and I are in it, our dearly departed are in it, that we're all in this superconscious state all the time, and that this is the illusion, right? And we kind of know from physics that this is an illusion anyway, to a large extent, But when we understand that, for example, these new theories of consciousness, that the brain is an antenna just tuning in a little droplet of Kerry-Marie and a little droplet of Karen, and then when the brain is gone, the antenna is gone. But that doesn't mean that the wave, it's like your radio breaks, the wavelength doesn't go away, right? We start to understand, I mean, I know I'm grossly oversimplifying it, but if we start to sort of see things like that, then we know there is no death, right? So that hugely shifts everything, for one thing. But there is still grief, because there is always grief. There's always the physical loss of the person. There's always the grief for the loss of the hope of the future. There's very complicated issues around grief, and that we just have to grieve. It's a part, with things coming into our life, things leaving our life, that sort of constant fluidity in life. It's part of life.
And they're part of your nervous system as well.
Huh?
They're part of your nervous system.
Yeah.
It's even when you break up a relationship parts, they're part of your nervous system. So physically, you've got to get used to whether it's a broken relationship or someone knows has passed away. They're not part of your nervous system. And that takes quite a bit of adjusting as well.
It does, and it's very deeply, very, very deeply emotional. I've actually been teaching classes on writing through grief for spiritual growth. I just finished one at the Arthur Conan Doyle Centre, and I'm doing one starting the end of the month with the new centre in New York. But where we start to sort of access those feelings and work through them. The thing about grief is that our understanding, like, to be honest, I think I'm kind of excited about finding out what's there, because we can't. It doesn't matter how much we see or how much we hear or how much we're told by people in the spirit world. Everything that they tell us, they're telling us through language, our language and our frame of reference. People say, "Oh, what's it like in the spirit world?" Well, even if they wanted to tell us, they couldn't quite, because they can only
they kind of
give us a metaphor. It's going to metabolize it to tell us what we understand. Somebody asked me one time, "Can we drive a truck in the afterlife?" So the thing is that I think if we can just be open and excited about the next phase. I'm not saying we want to promote ourselves there at all anytime soon, but I'm just saying it takes away that fear of death. For me, it's replaced the fear. It's replaced a fear of death with curiosity. But having said that, we still grieve, and we still need to have that compassion for ourselves to allow us grieve. We need to have that compassion for other people who are grieving, because there's no shortcut to grief, and there's no getting over it. There's no moving on. We just learn to become new with this new experience. And I really think that the suffering, and this is a huge Buddhist concept, the idea of suffering comes from attachment, which is not a bad thing, because we grieve because we were attached, because we loved, and now we grieve. And so, these two things are connected. But the only antidote to that is to allow yourself to grieve, to allow yourself
Yes.
to show yourself compassion. Because I find, and I'm sure you find this as well, that grief has a way of deepening our sense, in most cases, not I won't say all cases, but can deepen our sense of empathy, can deepen our sense of compassion. It's like when we suffer, we can empathize better with the suffering
Definitely.
of others. So I
Mm.
do think, in that respect, as miserable as it is, it really can bring us into that place of sensitivity and empathy and compassion as well.
Totally. Very much. I said that to someone recently. I said, I know this is really hard, but it's going to change you and make you a much better person because it's going to bring that empathy, this experience that you're going through.
Mm. And I think self-compassion is a really big thing. I
Yeah.
mean, we're not very big in the West anyway on, well, I know you're in Australia, but you know what I mean.
New
Um,
Zealand. New Zealand.
or New Zealand. Sorry.
Okay.
Sorry. Um, we're not very big on throwing ourselves bones, you know, where you like we have this thing of like we're supposed to get on, we're supposed to achieve, we're supposed to be somewhere, and if we're not thinking like that, all the people around us are telling us, um, you know, move on, get out, do this, meet somebody else, whatever, you know, and it's like just leave the person alone.
They don't
You
need
can't
that. It
you
makes it
can't beat them out the door with the stick, you know. But
makes
that's the way we think of it. In we're not very good at dealing with death in Western culture, you know.
like
Um,
zip it up, you know.
eh,
They're in a better
or
place, you know. At least they're
yeah,
not.
it's medicated away, or
Yeah,
yeah, people are stuffed in homes,
be
or
happy that they're not in pain anymore, and all things, sort of things like that. Yeah.
yeah, exactly.
Did
And
somebody
you know,
say,
the
"Oh,
Irish people.
at least you got another child." That's what I heard someone say once. They lost their son, and they said, "Oh, well, at least you got another two other sons." I thought I couldn't believe it.
Oh my God.
Dreadful. Yeah, dreadful. So people, I don't know why people say things like that. They actually make it
People
worse.
have no idea. They just don't know. People don't know what to. People are so uncomfortable. I think this is one of the drawbacks of the sort of the falling away of religion to large millions of people is that before religion offered consolation in death, right?
Yes.
Because you went to God and you went to heaven, whatever. And you take that away, and then all of a sudden people don't know what to do with death, and they don't know what to say. And you don't want to be going around saying, "Oh, he's sitting at the right hand of God," if you're talking to somebody who's not religious and doesn't believe him, because it's not helpful. So I think people just don't know what to. It was one thing I actually was talking, you know, talked about when I was doing my research is in the novels that I was looking at, people don't really admit to being dead. They're like, you know, in Lincoln and the Bardo, it's all their sick boxes, or there's they never they have all these other words for being dead, so they don't have to actually use the word or recognize the word, you know. And I thought people were like, oh, you know, they're all in denial of death. And I'm like, how many times do we use the word? You know, we don't say, oh, my mother died. We tend to say use words like passed away or moved on, or, you know, we do it all of the time. This
Mm.
idea of trying to dodge that
It's really
that
interesting. I've heard
thing.
spirits say to me a few times, though, which is really interesting. I'm not dead, I'm alive.
Mm,
They just said that my body's just not here anymore. And I've said that quite often. Yeah.
mm,
And I think the other hopeful thing about, and the one thing you said was like, no, so knowing is knowing yourself, not believing.
yeah.
So the other thing that's beautiful about having this knowing is that you will see someone again. There will be a
Mm,
reunion. I think
mm.
other thing. I think that's something that's quite comforting as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Very
Well, I
comforting.
think what it does is you know, if death is not the end, then it's death, you know, being dead is not what we think it is. You know, that the definition of dead is not what we think it is. It's something, you know, dead just, you know, it just becomes a word that is not accurately describing
Instead of
what
physical,
it.
instead of physical, not of the spirit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm.
So then I was going to talk to you about, so what do you feel about the Eastern religions and indigenous religions and or practices and things like that? Would you look?
Well, yeah, I tend towards Eastern, and I, obviously come out of Celtic tradition, or an ancient Irish tradition, which is quite indigenous. But you must be very aware of the indigenous
Yeah, in New
spirituality
Zealand,
around you.
definitely,
Yeah.
definitely, yes.
Um, I kind of tend to, I sort of wandered into Buddhism nearly 30 years ago now, to be honest, and I just found the lack of dogma, the sort of common sense, the sort of personal responsibility, the quietness, the
Yeah,
simplicity of it.
yeah.
Um, that really spoke to me. Um, Now, I mean, there's Buddha Dharma, but Buddha Dharma is not dogma. It's not like you must, you must, you must, and we don't, there's not all of this. But the Buddha Dharma is just the Buddha's teachings,
Mm,
and they can be quite complex, and they require they disarm the mind. And you can only really resonate. You have to really pay attention on that level to a lot of the Buddha Dharma, to understand what's going on. And so that the sort of compassion and the tolerance and the sort of loving kindness that's pretty key to the Buddhist practitioners, or the Buddhist practice, that sort of resonated with me a lot, especially having grown up Catholic, and I was educated by the nuns. I went to school with the nuns, where we were
same,
always getting
same.
bashed around the classroom. You're just always getting bashed.
Why do Catholics become mediums? It's so interesting, isn't it? There's a
There
lot
is
of
quite a few. There is
uh,
quite a few, yeah. So just that sense of having to take personal responsibility for the work, for the meditation, for the space I'm in. Like if I'm angry, I need to sit with my anger as opposed to sort of going out and raging and blaming or whatever. I'm not saying Catholics are tough, but you know what I mean? It's like it sort of takes all of these things that we have to deal with and contend with in life, and you just bring them back into the quietness of your cushion, and you sit with it, and you reflect it, and you release it. And it really, I found, takes away the sort of sense of authoritarian control or
mm,
dogma. And you're never told, what you have to believe. You're told what the teachings are. You can read the teachings, and you make of them, you do your best with those, and so that really speaks to me more. And in terms of indigenous religions, and I don't want to make blanket, because I know like the Celts are very different from Maori, and whatever, but the thing I do love about indigenous religions, is that their tendency to have this very, very, very deep sense of connection
yes,
to
they
the
do.
planet, to the land, to each other, to all that is.
They
And I
do.
think that's another thing that's very core to Buddhism, is that intrinsic sense of interconnection of all beings. And I do feel that the indigenous religions have that as well, which I do.
Yeah.
It's hard to go out and see somebody you absolutely disagree with, or somebody who's doing horrible things, and actually have to go, oh my God, I'm connected. We're all connected. It can be very, very challenging. It's an easy thing to say. It's not necessarily an easy thing to
They
live.
love connected though to the earth, to where they love
Mm.
to their family, to their ancestors.
Yes.
That's the thing I found. It sort of goes right throughout the ages and right forward. And that's like, I think with the Māori religion, it's like the
Mm.
ancestors give you the baton, and then you
Mm.
hold the baton, and then you pass it on to the new generation.
Yes.
It's quite
Mm.
beautiful. It's quite
Mm.
beautiful. The other thing I've noticed about Indigenous was particularly like the Māori culture in New Zealand is they're really good with grief. They actually
Mm.
yeah, they really grieve for a long time,
Mm.
and it's all encompassing, and they wail and they cry and they take their time with
Mm.
it. They'd have like about a week off, and they all come together as a community and they
Oh,
talk
beautiful.
about it, and it's beautiful. They
Mm.
don't do what we do in our Western culture, which is like zip it up. It's like they really embrace it.
I mean,
And
Ireland has been traditionally very good like that as well.
a tangi is what they call it, don't they, Andre? It's a tangi. They have a tangi, and I think that's about a week. But they,
Tangi, it's called.
yeah,
Yeah. In Ireland, we have the Irish Wake, which are usually pretty
yes,
famous. They go on for 3 days. And we have keeners, and the keeners cry. they're the wailing women. They
Yes,
cry through
do the same in
the
Māori.
yeah.
Yes, yeah, so it's quite beautiful. Actually,
Mm,
I went to Ireland last year and I really felt there's a real sense of community and connection with family in Ireland. I really picked that up. And
mm,
my sister-in-law comes from a family of 15. They're Catholic family, but that sense of community and
mm,
realness and togetherness, and they all
mm,
live close to each other. It was amazing. It was
mm,
amazing to be part of that.
mm. Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's different. It's definitely different. Although, I mean, I think we are in contemporary culture moving into a put the sick in a nursing home, and whereas before they would live in the house as family. So I think contemporary life is starting to change a lot of that. So it's lovely when you find those traditions still alive and well.
Yeah, we do.
Mm.
We do. The person's put in a rest home and they're forgotten about, and they're lucky if someone comes
Yeah,
to visit them.
yeah, yeah,
So
absolutely.
yeah. So who knows what's going to happen? It's like let's get on with our modern life, and that's sort of
Yeah.
okay. So what about Eastern philosophies and things? What's your thoughts about Eastern philosophy, not just religion?
Well, I mean, Buddhism is a philosophy. It's not actually technically a religion because there's no God in it.
Okay,
No God in Buddhism. Um, and I mean, the Hindu religion, there's loads of gods in the Hinduism. I'm not an expert on Hinduism, but I've studied the Vedics, the Veda texts a little bit, the Vedas a little bit. Um, but they're kind of the forerunners to, I mean, the Buddha was it kind of emerged from that tradition anyway. Um, I find that the thing I like more about, say, Buddhism than, say, Hinduism is the simplicity of it. There's
right.
I think it's the same and with the Japanese religions as well. Um, China is largely, Buddhist at this point, I do believe, and um, so I think that beyond really those traditions, I wouldn't claim to be an expert now. I certainly wouldn't be an
Right.
expert on
It's
the nuances. I
something
mean,
that
I practice Zen, so Zen comes out of Japan, but then that's not the official religion of Japan. You know what I mean? So
you take what you
um, yeah, exactly. Yeah.
interesting. The other night, it doesn't happen every night. It happens now and again, and it happens. I get this like I call it in my book this angelic experience, and then my our medium at Arthur Finney College, my first visit picked up on it. So whether it's spiritual or angelic, and I can't articulate it. It's absolutely the
Mm,
most
beautiful.
amazing, beautiful experience. It's just
Mm,
lovely. But the other night I woke up because I was brought up there's God and then I believe in there's spirit and your guides and angels and all that sort of thing. That's my belief. And I was calling out, I was saying gods and angels and spirit, and I was saying the word gods.
mm,
Just think, and I was in a semi-conscious state.
mm,
Wow. I sort of woke up and thought, well, that is interesting.
mm.
It was
Yeah,
my God, it was gods.
yeah.
Yeah, so that sort of opened my mind up a little bit. I think what's happening with me spiritually. So I think sometimes it's not just what, like I said earlier, not just what you do the research on, what actually sits with you,
Mm,
what feels right for you to do, like through your own meditation, through your own spiritual growth. And I think
mm,
that personal growth is really important because I feel the better you are with your own personal growth and your own personal development, the calmer you are, the more relaxed you are, and the
mm,
more open you are, because I feel connecting to the spiritual growth and
mm,
where it takes you, you have to be sort of, I think it can help you if you're personally growing and getting calmer and dealing
mm.
with things. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, well, absolutely. I mean, a lot of us we have triggers,
Yes,
we have issues,
we
we
do.
have
You do.
bags of them that we're carrying around, and we're carrying hurts,
Mm,
and we know that hurt people hurt, so we have really a duty and responsibility to ourselves for our own healing, but also to other people as well to heal ourselves as well. But who the triggers are very, very old can often be pre-language. A lot of them, you mentioned earlier about the nervous system. A lot of these are sort of
Yeah.
things that are stored we know this from modern trauma theory. A lot of this is stored in the nervous system. This is not something you can sort of have work out in your head,
Yes.
that these things are going on. I think that to me, it's like I was saying earlier. I think that that's sort of like more like the self-help, the personal growth, our own healing is very much an intrinsic part of spirituality. It's not, but spirituality is greater than that. If you know what I mean.
Definitely.
The sacred is greater.
Definitely.
So the sacred is not just our own healing, but it's then also our own contribution, our own sense of belonging to something greater. But I do think that that's a very important part. And some people are very courageous in facing those little triggers that are whistling around in the dark,
You'll call
and
them
some people
demons.
never ever, huh?
You'll call
What?
them little demons. That's what they call them.
Yeah, the little demons running around in the dark, personal demons, not actual demons. Um, and then some people just don't want to do it
Right.
and don't want to have to look in those places, or would rather just live in denial or live in passive aggression or any of these things. So it's each to their own, really. I mean, we can't really, it's like, what is that spirit in this incarnation willing to do for its own growth? We
Absolutely.
can't dictate that. I think this is part of this sort of curated new forms sort of spirituality, that there is no dogma. There's no you must do this and you must do this or you must do this or you'll go to hell or any of these sorts of things. It's like it becomes all about personal responsibility, which is sort of a key aspect of the Buddhist philosophy, where we become personally responsible for doing that work ourselves. And it's never, as you know, never easy. Spiritual growth, personal growth is never easy, but it can be very freeing.
Very freeing, extremely freeing.
Mm,
Very much so, very freeing. The other thing is that I just did I'm doing a podcast. I think might be coming out tonight, actually, or tomorrow, on do you need to be perfect to be spiritual?
mm,
Because I think that's also a myth, because I think people think that they have to be this perfect person to be spiritual. And
mm.
dealing with human beings, we're not
It's
dealing
not
with.
possible. Yeah.
I remember when I went to the spiritual church and he said, I've made my first step to being spiritual. And I said, what's that? He said, I'm giving up coffee. And I was thinking, oh, really? And that's sort of almost like a religion. You know what I mean? I thought,
Yeah.
well, you have to give up coffee to be spiritual. It was quite funny, but
Like, apparently it's good for your heart, so I don't know why. Yeah.
I know, but that was his belief back then. And I had a weird belief before I went to Arthur Fundy College, is that I thought that it'd be like it'd be this like really strict diet, like a vegan diet, and I thought it would be no alcohol allowed or coffee or tea, and it was what I found I really loved about it was just whatever you wanted. There was
Mm.
no rules about it. That's one thing I really did like about that. There was no
Yeah.
judgment.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
yeah, like
Well,
we
I'm vegan, but yeah, they serve up whatever you want.
but that's what I mean. You don't have to
Yeah.
be.
You don't have to be. No. I'm not vegan because I think it's got good for my soul. I'm vegan because I think it's good for the animals.
Fair enough. And we've all got our own choices, and
Mm.
that's fine. But I don't think
Mm.
you're perfect to be spiritual. So other thing you talked about was um, about modern science. So can you touch on modern science?
Well, it was sort of one of the things I was looking at in terms of what's created this sort of shift in very mainstream, best-selling literature. I mean, the work I'm looking at, the thing is that ghost literature always reflects the culture from which it comes out. That's the one thing you can be guaranteed. If you look at
Mm,
any sort of ghost story going back and back to, all of the great ghosts, even back to Homer, it always reflects the values and the culture from which it was written in. So what it always reflects, so like Scrooge reflects the industrialization of Britain and so this is the one thing you could look at any ghost story a millennia from now, if we're all gone, aliens could arrive, read a ghost story and say, oh, that was what was going on in that culture at the time. It's just known, that's known about ghost literature. So what I found sort of interesting was, what is this reflecting? What is it reflecting now, and why? And so I think part of it was sort of what I'm calling the new physics. So this is physics sort of the early 1900s and on, up until, consciousness theory is not science. It's more of a sort of a philosophy at this point, but where our very sort of concept of what is real was challenged with new physics. And I think that I'm not by any stretch of the imagination trying to say that physics or science explains anything to do with spirituality. I'm not making that claim, never would, because they're different languages. They have different measuring sticks. They're very, very different things. But the fact that our sort of what had been held as, solid science, a solid and confirmed understanding of the world was upended. And so that really challenged how we kind of think about the world, how there's all sorts of, Einstein called it weird, spooky action, it's like modern science is very weird, and didn't conform to anything that went on before. And so it challenged how we see and think about the world. And I think anything that sort of upsets the apple cart like that, not trying to diminish physics into an apple cart, but you know what I mean? Anything that upsets the apple cart then demands us to actually question and think and discuss and be open. So I do think that has influenced the very old set paradigms that we had before, because now we realize what we thought is not the case, right? Yes, exactly. We've got something new going on. And it still doesn't have all the answers, which to me is interesting, because people sort of treat science almost like a religion, it's like, which is unbelievable, but it's like people even trying to prove the near-death experience or the out-of-body experience or mediumship. The scientists say, and it's almost like if the scientists say, then it must be so.
Absolutely.
It's just a strange thing,
It's real. I know. So something I've got a passion for and I'm really interested in is bringing science and spirituality together. Do you think that's possible?
No, I don't. No, because I think that science is a particular language to explain a particular thing, and it is designed to explain the physical world. Right. And spirituality is designed for us to understand our place in the world, but also our place in something bigger. Right. So spirituality is not a language that's designed to explain the mechanics of the physical universe, which is what science is, the different languages, completely different languages. I do think that they can influence each other for sure, but they're, so Erwin Schrödinger, who's the one of the earliest quantum physicists, had said that when he stuck for answers, he has gone to the Vedic texts. I think it was Niels Bohr said he went to the Upanishads. So, when they hit an impasse within the mathematics of science, they found that going to these very ancient, Vedic texts or to Eastern philosophies helped them sort of just open their mind to make space for sometimes counterintuitive approaches that solved problems. So right. I think they can help each other like that, but they're different languages. People say, oh, well, science explained this. No, can't. It's not designed to explain the unseen world. It's designed to explain the physical world. It's what it is. It doesn't pretend to be anything else.
Do you think we're evolving to become a more of a spiritual world?
Doesn't look like it these days, does it?
Yeah. You can only hope that it does. That one day that will happen. It doesn't appear to be that way, does it?
No, really doesn't.
So how times, these difficult times, because it's difficult times for everyone, how can people find solace or comfort in some sort of spirituality in a modern way?
Well, I find personally, it comes back to the sense of interconnection. It comes back to the sense of contribution. I mean, if it comes back to trying to help as much as you can. I mean, within the in Buddhist philosophy, part of one of the sutras is we save all beings, which of course can't be done. We can't save all beings, but what we can do is work on ourselves,
Yes, isn't
so
there?
that, as we talked about
Yourself.
earlier,
Got to work on yourself. Yeah, that's
yeah,
important.
we're not going out, we're not, we're not dumping our prejudices, our isms, or anything else on other people. We've got to sort of start to address that, to try to work towards a place of, if not understand, or at least to maybe try to work towards a place of attempting some understanding of people who have ideas that are polar opposite to us, of really looking to what can I do? I can't save all beings, but what small things can I do today to be a better person, to help somebody else, for example. And sometimes that's all we can do is really focus on the
Yeah.
contribution we can make as best as we can to others.
Well, that little thing, I talked to someone about that once, and it was a time when I was a single mum. I was working full time, had three children. I had the children 24/7. Financially, I was struggling, and I had $1 and I had to vacuum my car, and I was exhausted. And I went and vacuumed my car, and I went in to pay for the money, or I went in there, and this man turned around to me and said, "You look really tired." He said,
Mm.
"I want to buy you a cup of coffee."
Mm.
Burst into tears. It was like someone saw me, and it's always that's tiny little thing that's so, and I'll
Tiny
never
things.
forget. That was the biggest thing that he ever did for me. Was
Yeah, yeah. You never know. You never know. And I think it just comes from striving to live from a place of compassion and loving kindness, no matter, in the face of no matter what, to try to not give in, and I'm not saying that means being passive and accepting what's going on, but I feel like we can take action from a compassionate and loving kind place. We don't have to take action from an angry or an intolerant or a judgmental place, which is challenging. It's challenging, but I think that's one thing we can do, because I do feel like, as I said, within the Buddhist philosophy, to save all beings, we have to first be in that place where we can come from a place where we are helping, as you say, without even necessarily realizing it,
yeah,
just by virtue of how we are within ourselves and how we emanate and how we project within ourselves, um, can have some influence over other people. And I know there's probably loads of activists saying, well, that's not enough, that's not enough. But I'm not saying that that's all you do, but you can be an activist from a place of love and kindness. You don't have to be an activist from a place of anger, you
yeah.
know.
So little acts of kindness, and also I think things can have a ripple effect as well.
Absolutely.
Things have a ripple effect, and also I feel people are lost. They can belong to a community. There's Facebook groups. There's podcasts people can listen to. They can research. There's a lot of stuff out there.
Mm.
Yeah, so getting a sense of self and also a sense of connection and community. I think that community is somewhere they can trust is really important. And I think there is things out there for us to reach out to and do what's right.
Yeah, and it was something else actually, now that you mentioned it, I came across when I was doing my research on why our concepts of, metaphysical concepts shifting. Um, was there's a lot of surveys, a lot of um, research has been done into what's called the loneliness epidemic. They've
Mm.
actually now got a minister for loneliness in Britain. It's become that
Oh,
much of an epidemic. Yeah.
really?
The US Department of Health and Human Services have issued bulletins about this, and exasperated, of course, by COVID, but existing before COVID, and, sort of retreating into these lonely spaces. So it's a good point you're making. I think it's always, even just to go down to something going on in the community, or just to sort of get out and go and try to connect with people, I think, and try to find like-minded people in the real world as well, I think can be quite important. I think it's very easy, if you're sort of isolated, to feel very overwhelmed and very alone. And so I think it can be very important to actually go find,
Absolutely.
and it is, if, we used to do that with the church. That used to be what the church did.
Exactly.
Uh,
Yeah. One
so
thing is
now we need to find other ways of doing that.
actually, because one thing Spirit often says to me, one of the message, not every time, but one of the things they say is keep social.
Mm,
That's really them, is keep social. And there's lots of community things around. So
mm,
you're a spiritual medium, you do readings, and you also teach as well,
mm.
take
Yeah.
workshops, things like that. So you can tell us a little bit about that so people can reach out to you.
Yeah, so I've kind of changed the way what I'm teaching, how I'm working this year a bit, because, I just came out of last September, I finished a 4-year doctorate. So it's sort of, I've decided to change things. So now I'm actually doing a little bit, I'm spending a little bit more time. I mean, I'm still teaching mediumship, but I've designed sort of on-demand classes for beginners. And now I'm teaching in terms of mediumship more experimental
Okay.
things, like we're working with character development, working with story development. So I have a friend who's an acting coach coming in, and we're sort of like doing a lot of experiment with more advanced, or sort of intermediate / advanced mediums, where it's not all about let me get some evidence and place the contact, where now we can actually start, because I'm sure you've come across this as well, that mediumship is much bigger than that, much bigger, it has much more potential than that. And when we just think of mediumship as getting a contact and giving evidence and giving a message, I think we make it very, 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 very small. And it's bigger, much, much bigger than that. And the spirit world has much more potential than that. So I'm doing some more experimental mediumship classes this year, which are really interesting for me. And we're doing 3 of them this year. We're halfway through the first one. And then I'm also, I teach trance, because we do a lot of love trance, we do a lot of trance work. I have a trance class coming up next beginning of May. And then I'm also this year teaching, mostly because I've been asked, as one of those things that you said, sometimes things just sort of fall in front of you. I've been asked to do, to sort of teach things like, writing through grief, trance writing, a lot of more of, so I just finished a course on a journey through words, and now I've got another one starting the end of this month, actually, a couple of weeks actually, with the new center in New York, on writing through loss. And so those are beautifully healing things to work on, and they combine sort of meditation and presence and some Buddhist philosophy with writing. So that's something that I really am enjoying doing this year as well. So I'm doing that. So that's sort of, I also teach with the Shift Network sometimes. So I've got another course up with the Shift Network over the winter, which should be fun. It's on Celtic mysticism.
Oh,
So
wow.
it'll correspond to key things in the Celtic mysticism, which is like the solstice, obviously, Bridget's Day, the goddess of healing. And so that hopefully will be a nice,
That
fun thing
sounds
to
really
do for
exciting.
Christmas. Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds
So yeah, that's the teaching program. Oh, and I'm teaching at NYU. I teach literature, ghost literature at NYU now as well.
okay. So I was going to go back to the storytelling. So is that with a like a spirit telling you their story? Is that what you mean by that? So
Well,
you,
it's moving mediumship beyond just the facts of the evidence. Mediumship is often just like a grocery list of facts, and
yeah, yeah, yeah.
you died of this and you died of that and you did this and you died from that and you drove this and you did whatever. Um, but and I'm like, really trying to make mediumship more about the way we speak to each other. We don't speak in grocery lists to each other.
No, we
We
don't.
speak in a story.
I see
We
what you
don't
mean.
go cauliflower. I wouldn't say, hey, Kerry-Marie, cauliflower. You
Yeah.
would talk about, oh, I just made cauliflower. I love, whatever. There's a story around everything, and it's there and it's available in mediumship, and it brings a much greater sense of meaning and presence and depth to what the person is actually trying to say, because you know that they're not trying to speak like a grocery list,
No.
but that's what we have become accustomed to receiving and sharing. And we're experimenting with now is receiving the whole story. So they share a detail. They didn't just say a detail. There's a whole story there. We just got one little detail of an entire story that's there behind it.
Yeah,
So
it's
we're
interesting.
experimenting with a lot of that, following the
Have
story.
have you ever seen Cindy Barker demonstrate?
No.
It's incredible. I seen her and she goes and then she talked about this little man that passed, and I remember she told a story and she talked about how he had a pencil he used to have behind his ear, and he used to bet on horses, and he used to get the pencil and he used to lick it before he would put it off, and then she would take you into someone's house and she says going
Mm,
into the house and she got the clock and then she described the clock, and yeah, so it was like telling a story.
mhm,
And it was like when I was watching her demonstrating, it was like, it wasn't just like all these facts. It was like,
mhm,
wow, it sort of opened up and flourished. And it was a lot more. See, I still telling you now because I remember it.
mm. Yeah, it's very
Story.
true. You
It
know,
is,
for me, I'm a storyteller by nature. Also, Irish people are by nature storytellers. We're known for it, always
yeah,
telling stories. In Ireland, in most countries you go along, people say, "Hi, how are you doing?" or "Hi, how are you?" You go down and say, "Hey, what's the story?" We're very orientated towards telling stories. So, and as a writer, I've always been writing since I was 12 years old. Um, so sort of the story just kind of naturally comes. So, in my mind, that's what I'm always, just without having to think about it, that's what I'm always curious about. And so that's sort of naturally what
yeah,
comes with it.
yeah.
And it can be brought, to do that, you need to learn the art of storytelling, which is something that can be taught. So that's what
That's so,
we're
oh,
doing.
that's cool. It's learning that art. That's so spirit can communicate you because you've learned that art. I love that. I love that. I
Mm,
sort of find that sometimes Spirit talks about current events. There's one lady that comes to me regularly, and he tells stories. And
mm,
he came and he talked about a new car, and then he said, "There's the blue car," and then swapped it, and then he said, "This is the fourth car." And what it was is that she's just traded in her blue car,
mm.
and that was her fourth car since he died. And then he
Ah,
and said, "There's a story about the mouse," and he came in laughing, and she just had a mouse the other day with a real story around it. So sometimes I
mm.
find spirit just don't tell stories about themselves; they come in telling stories about the
Yeah,
people.
I mean, we are our stories. I mean, any writer, I think it was Mary Oliver. I'm not sure if it's Mary Oliver or not, but I would say we are our stories. That's what we do. That's how we communicate with each other.
Oh
You
wow!
know, we always talking in stories. And that's what I in the classes I'm teaching them. And every week, everybody has to go. Every day, somebody's got to go and just observe some very ordinary incident in the street, or waiting for the bus, or whatever it is, and actually pay attention to the story there, and then come back and they've got to write a little 100-word story, and post in my Facebook group, and we send to go and then go through them to help them shift from thinking about I see, I do, or whatever, to actually putting themselves into the place of the person at the bus stop. What's their story? What's going on with them? What's their motivation? Who are they? What's their mannerisms? And just paying attention to all of these tiny rich details. When you start doing that, you start laying the pathways
It
to
makes it
just naturally be
makes an
like that.
interesting
Yeah.
medium. It makes an interesting medium that can also communicate that way. It's wonderful. I love that story. It's something I'm going to take on board. So thank you. So how do people get hold of you, Karen?
Oh, well, I suppose the easiest thing to do is probably just go to my website, because there's anything coming up, there's services, there's my free community, there's guided meditations, talks, recommended reading, all that sort of stuff. That's there. And you can also, if they want to sign up, join the mailing list or join the community and stay up to date on what's going on. That's also connected to private Facebook groups so people can chat with each other. Just trying to sort of started trying to build, a couple of years ago, community. So it's not just people
That's
coming in to take a class and going away. That people come in and then they can join the group and then they can swap and chat and practice and all sorts of things with each other.
so you're offering something that we were talking about is about connection and
Mm.
community.
Mm.
That is wonderful, Karen, that you're
Because
offering
you can feel very isolated in this work, So and also I created master classes for the beginners and intermediate mediums. Anyone doing that, because I don't teach beginners anymore. But I created these on-demand master classes, which are 20 weeks long, and but then, the thing is that you do a masterclass, you're on your own. It's really easy to get discouraged. It's really easy to give up. And so what I did was create a community so people like that can check in, so they don't feel like they're just sort of sitting in their living room by themselves, trying to talk to somebody. So yeah, it was just a lot of just trying to create a positive. And we
And
also have healing. We have a little healing group that meets every Sunday for
wonderful.
healing from all around the world. And yeah, so it's
So do
nice.
private readings as well?
I do. I don't do readings. I don't do psychic readings.
Uh,
I
uh,
do
private
mediumship
sitting. Yeah,
sittings. Yeah, I do
private
sittings,
sitting.
private sittings, and then I do what I call soul to soul sessions, which are more about sort of soul helping people recognize their soul's path. So not psychic readings, because it's really about just trying to reflect back what's within the wisdom of the person's soul
Well,
I mean, they're not the sort of thing you want to come into and go, oh, will I move, get a new job? But that's not. These are very, very deep things. Like, what was your soul's purpose
hmm.
here? Where does your soul want you to pivot and navigate towards or move towards? So we start looking at things on those much deeper sort of levels as well. Do that as well,
You,
yeah.
you offer a lot. You really help people. So what is your website name?
It's KarenFrancisMcCarthy.com. So it's Francis with an E, KarenFrancisMcCarthy.com.
Hope you'll get hold of you. So thank you very much for your time. And I'm sure we'll meet you again and see
Yes, hopefully
podcast
so.
in the future. So thank you. Okay. Well,
Well,
thank you.
hopefully we'll meet again in England, probably, or Ireland or some point.
Oh, that'd
Or
be
maybe
nice.
I'll get out to New Zealand someday
Yes, that'd be awesome. That'd be
while I'm
great.
still in my body.
It's somebody. Okay. Thanks, Karen.
All right, take care.